Faith had a restless night, with a premonition tugging at her soul and keeping her awake. Her heart ached, causing her to toss and turn in bed. She got up twice during the night to drink lemon water in an attempt to calm down. Faith was a very independent girl. At the insistence of her father, she graduated from the university in Switzerland in her mid-20s. She decided to stay in Switzerland and opened a small advertising agency. She even managed to be married to a local businessman, for whom she once did advertising and promoted his pharmaceutical production. However, the longer she lived with her husband, the more she realized that they had entirely different mentalities. Men in her homeland were much more understanding and less selfish. One day, Faith asked her husband, Richard, for help. "Could you please take me to the doctor? I seem to have a high fever and I feel very ill," she pleaded. "Call a cab, dear," her husband replied. This was the final straw for Faith. She filed for a divorce. Unfortunately, her husband had been very prudent in drawing up a marriage contract, which Faith, being in love, had signed almost without reading. After the divorce, she received nothing from her husband's fortune. On the other hand, Richard got half of his wife's advertising agency, and Faith had no choice but to sell the other half and open a small travel agency. With her brilliant education in marketing and advertising, she quickly built up the business, and things started looking up for her again. Her father, who stayed in their homeland and ran a large business, helped her in every way he could. He insisted that Faith stay abroad and not return home. "Dad, hi," she called her father one day. "How are you doing? How is your health? Maybe I should come and visit you." "Hello, my dear," she heard her father's tired voice say through the phone. "I'm all right, as long as you're all right. Business as usual. I'm keeping everyone in a tight grip. Remember, daughter, if you loosen your grip, the crows will swoop in and tear your business to pieces." Faith's father had recently celebrated his 70th birthday, but he still claimed to be able to give any 50-year-old man a head start. He became a father at 45, claiming there was no time before. Faith never knew her mum. According to her father, she had died immediately after childbirth, although he spoke about her in a dry and factual way, and this topic was taboo in the family. "There's nothing to rake up the past," he would always reply whenever little Faith asked about her mother. "I don't want to talk about it. There's no mum, honey. Just calm down and forget it." "Well, tomorrow is Mother's Day," little Faith said sadly. "Everyone in the class has a mum coming, but who do I have?" "I'll be there," replied her father firmly. "I'm your mum and your dad." And indeed, every Mother's Day, Faith's father would come to school himself and bring a huge cake bought from an expensive confectionery. This was a tradition in Faith's class, and everyone was happy. These memories overwhelmed Faith that night. "Well, why is there such restlessness in my soul? It seems that everything is in order. The bills are paid. I'm feeling great. Didn't argue with anyone. But my soul still hurts," she thought. Her thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. "Faith Redford?" asked an unfamiliar voice. "Yes, it's me," Faith answered, feeling excited. "It's your father's lawyer. Please accept my condolences. Your dad passed away tonight from a heart attack. He wasn't complaining about anything, and nothing foretold trouble. This morning the maid found him lying on the floor. He must have tried to call someone, but didn't have time. Please come. You're needed here." "I'll be there tomorrow," Faith could only say. Faith felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her feet. Just yesterday, she had talked to her father on the phone, and everything had been fine. But today, he was gone, and no one was there to ask how she was doing or give her a comforting hug or kiss on the forehead. She was too young to stay without her parents. It just wasn't fair. Who would support her now? Who would cheer her on for her small achievements? Who would give her advice? Faith felt as though a large piece of her heart had been torn away, and the wound could not be stitched back up. Her head spun, and her brain refused to accept this terrible information. She went out onto the street, and everything suddenly seemed strange and indifferent to her. People were walking by, talking as if nothing had happened. Surreal, thought Faith. I'm devastated, but I don't have any tears. I can't even cry. She sat down directly on the sidewalk and then noticed that she was barefoot. She had gone out into the street without her shoes on. In the evening, a friend, who was also her colleague, came to visit. Together with a notary, they drew up a general power of attorney so that the friend could sell the business while Faith was in her home country. Her friend bought her plane tickets, helped her pack her suitcase, and escorted Faith to the airport. Grief overwhelmed Faith so much that she couldn't remember how she had gotten on the airplane. Only when she found herself in her seat did she realize how tired and hungry she was. She had lunch, which was brought to her by the stewardess, and then fell asleep. It was raining when she arrived at her hometown, but suddenly she remembered her father's words. "Rain, you're not sugar, you won't melt." For the next 3 days, she was busy with the funeral. Father's friends, colleagues, and former co-workers came to see her and helped in any way they could. After the funeral was over and people were leaving the wake, her father's old friend, Mr. Cumming, with whom he had been friends since school, approached her. "You have to pull yourself together, Faith," he said, stroking Faith's head. "Your father's business has been idle for a week, and he would never allow himself to do such a thing. Your father didn't take vacations or days off, so stop grieving, especially since your daddy wouldn't want you to. Take charge, trust no one, don't let his life's work go to waste, and I'll help you if need be, and recommend trustworthy people." "Thank you, Mr. Cumming." Faith hugged the elderly man and cried. "You should visit me more often. After all, you're like my second dad, you know." The elderly man gave Faith a comforting hug, promised all possible help, and left. Next to Faith during these days was her faithful childhood friend Sandy, who surrounded her with care. The next morning, the lawyer called and suggested meeting at the office. Faith, dressed in a black dress, went to meet him. "Good morning," he greeted. "Firstly, please accept my condolences, but you've probably guessed why I've called you here. Your father left a will stating that he bequeathed all his real estate assets and the company to you as his sole heir." "Thank you," Faith said. "I hope you will continue to work with me as you have done for many years with my father." "I would be honored," the attorney replied. "I would be happy to continue working with you." Faith was glad that besides Boris, she had one more assistant, a respected, well-known lawyer in town. Faith went to the company right after her meeting with the lawyer. She showed up in the same black dress. It made an indelible impression on the secretary, who remained standing like a dumbfounded at the sight of Faith in a morning dress. Not thinking long, the new owner demanded a meeting of the board of directors, where she introduced herself as the new head of the company. Among these large business sharks who gathered around the long table in the office of the deceased, she looked like a fragile and inexperienced girl. However, seeing the smug smirk of some of the directors, Faith remembered Mr. Cummings's words that now there is a turning point in the company which should not be let down. According to half of the employees, she did not see a single drop of sympathy, and so she gathered all her will into a fist, as she could do before, and decided to show these people that she was not a total pillow princess, but the real businesswoman. "Thank you, Dad, for everything, for the opportunity to learn from the best teachers, for your help and advice, for my character that you helped me to cultivate in myself," she thought. "Gentlemen," Faith said aloud, "allow me to introduce myself. I am Faith Redford, and now I am responsible for all the directions our company is engaged in. Please contact me with any relevant questions. I dare to hope that you will also help me to learn all the subtleties of business for the prosperity of our common business. By the mood in the hall, Faith realized that she would not have to wait for any special help from the managers appointed by her father. There were only a few people who immediately after the meeting approached her with their questions about the company's activities, as well as with their suggestions for the development and maintenance of the company afloat. By simple checks, which her father had taught her, Faith was able to determine the real state of affairs of the company. The audit showed that some of the managers, taking advantage of the precarious position, began to steal and leak secret information to competitors. Therefore, Faith, with the support of her father's old friend, made some personnel changes. She introduced strict rules into the company's regulations, which to some unscrupulous employees seemed like real reprisals. These actions immediately made obvious who was in his place and who wasted the resources of the company in vain, and the business, which had recently been cracking at the seams, began to work in full force. Some employees started working double shifts and earning high salaries and bonuses, while customers were flocking to the company. As a result, the company's revenue increased. Now, no one said that Faith was a wealthy heiress who lived a carefree life abroad. Everyone realized that she was the worthy daughter of her father, and she was fully capable of running his company. As Faith worked hard to put her father's company in order, his house remained empty. At first, she couldn't bear to be in it because everything reminded her of her dad. But as she worked 14-hour days, the pain began to dull, and she decided to return to the nest her father had built for her. "Could you stay with me, at least for a while?" Faith asked her friend Sandy. "The house is big and I'm so lonely." "Of course," her friend replied reassuringly. "But not for long. You need time to get used to it in the end." The week passed quickly, and Sandy returned home. But in that time, they transformed the previously dull house of the old bachelor into a cozy home, entirely changing the design. The mansion became brighter, and Faith felt lighter. However, she still felt lonely in such a large house, so she decided to get a dog. As a child, she loved dogs, particularly sheepdogs. Sadly, her father forbade her from having a four-legged friend. Without much thought, Faith began to search for the right breed in ads. Unfortunately, sheepdogs were no longer in fashion, but she found a kennel that bred German shepherds. Faith got in her car and rushed to meet her future friend. "You're late," said the kennel owner. "All the puppies have already been taken. You'll have to wait a year. I don't allow my dogs to give birth too often." "It's a pity." Faith was saddened. "I'm the only one left. I thought I'd get myself a friend. At least it would be easier for me to live." Then, behind the kennel owner's back, Faith noticed a young dog limping on his hind leg as it came out of its enclosure. It was a beautiful German shepherd with very intelligent eyes. The dog stood up and gazed at Faith before walking over, wagging its tail and licking her hand. "Thor, get back here," the kennel owner shouted out. "Can't you see that I'm talking? Go back to your place." The dog lowered its head and tail before slowly walking back towards the enclosure, peeking back at Faith. "I like him," Faith exclaimed. "He chose me himself. I think we'll be friends. And he's so handsome." "Thor has been lame since birth," the owner explained. "He's about a year old and nobody wanted him. And I didn't want to give Thor to the wrong hands either. There are all sorts of people. But I can give him to you for free if you won't bring him back. It would be a betrayal to him." "Of course not," Faith replied. "I don't betray my friends." "All right, then call him," said the owner. Faith boldly entered the enclosure. "Thor," she said to the dog affectionately, "will you come with me? I will love you, and we'll walk and live together as friends." The dog looked at the girl with its black, intelligent eyes before walking over and lying down at her feet, making it clear that he trusted her. The kennel owner was happy that his pet would finally find a family. He gave Faith a lot of advice on care and feeding, handed her a veterinary passport and Thor's pedigree. Faith went home happy. Now she had a friend with whom she will surely never be alone and sad. Although she didn't admit it to anyone, living alone in the house was creepy for her. And now with Thor, life was going to get better. Faith could feel it. Thor sat in the back seat as if he had been riding in a car all of his life. He poked his muzzle out of the open window and watched the passing scenery. When Faith opened the car door, Thor jumped out of it with a joyful bark and ran through the garden. He then ran into the hallway, sniffed all the rooms, and lay down on the rug near the fireplace, making it clear that he felt at home. "Well, Thor, shall we go to dinner?" Faith said. "I've got a nice meat bone for you." The dog wagged his tail happily and ran after his new mistress. The evening passed quickly. Falling asleep, Faith felt the dog was lying next to her bed and peacefully sniffing his nose. She became calm and cozy. She felt at home now, too. "Did you really buy a dog? And such a huge one at that?" Sandy, who came to visit the next day, was surprised at the sight of Thor. "It's such a burden. You should be thinking about yourself. And you're doing such nonsense." "Thor is not a burden," replied Faith. "He's my friend, and we love each other." "Maybe you'll marry him," laughed her friend. "Oh, you'd better find yourself a boyfriend. That would be more useful." Those last words proved prophetic for Faith. While walking Thor in the park that evening, she was introduced to a young man named Kevin. As Thor ran around scaring squirrels, Faith and Kevin got to talking. "Do you live far from here?" Kevin asked. "It's dark now. I can walk you out. You never know what would happen." "I'm not afraid," said Faith. "I have Thor with me, and he won't let me get hurt. But if you want to walk me out, you're welcome. I don't live far away." When they arrived at Faith's mansion together, Kevin was surprised by where his new acquaintance lived. He seemed to shrink, and all his fun disappeared. Faith noticed and asked what was wrong. "So you're the new mistress of the mansion? Half the city talks about you. They say the daughter of a powerful businessman came from abroad and set her own order. You don't seem like a rough businesswoman, though. But I'm poor, living with my sick mum. Her pension is small, and I'm working hard to provide her with treatment. It's expensive, and my job doesn't pay well, so I have to work nights. You probably won't even talk to me now. I'm small fish to you," Kevin said. "What a nonsense," Faith exclaimed. "I have all kinds of friends, both rich and poor. You're too narrow-minded to think like that. Let me make you some tea. My au pair baked many cakes this morning. If Thor hasn't eaten them all, we will have some for sure." The two laughed and went to the terrace. At the house, Kevin admired its surroundings and behaved modestly and tactfully. To Faith, he seemed like a charming and unspoiled young man. It could be said that she liked Kevin at first sight. She could see that he was interested in her as he looked at her in the mirror opposite. However, Thor did not share his mistress's sympathy. He wouldn't let Kevin pet him and growled quietly at him. After an hour, he brought Kevin's shoes and put them next to him, as if to say he was not welcome. Faith laughed and said, "Thor, what are you doing? Look, Kevin, Thor is jealous." "I understand him. I'd be jealous too," Kevin replied with a smile. When Kevin left, Faith called Sandy and told her that she seemed to be in love. "And I've told you," her friend replied. "It's time to get smart and organize your personal life. And anyway, I'm already asleep." Faith did not notice how 2 months passed. During this time, she and Kevin met every day, and he soon confessed his love to her. Faith reciprocated, and it seemed that nothing could mar their happy time. Kevin was at Faith's house every day, but he was too shy to take her to his place. "Why doesn't he want to introduce me to his mother?" Faith asked her friend Sandy, perplexed. "Well, understand him," soothed her friend. "He's probably shy about his modest dwelling and his sick, bedridden mother. You don't know what kind of situation they have. That's why he doesn't want to shock you. You're a princess to him, and he's a simple guy with big problems. But you know, Faith, all our friends are jealous of you. When they saw your Kevin, who was so suave, handsome, and smart beyond his years, they all turned green with envy. They always pick up rich boys who don't care much about them, and you're the lucky one. So hang on to him. He liked you in the park, and he found out about the house and your wealth later, so you could say it's just a nice bonus for him." And Faith calmed down. She enjoyed the attention and care from Kevin, and was amused by the jealous behavior of her favorite dog, who chewed up Kevin's shoe. One day, while Faith and Kevin were sitting in a small cozy cafe, she noticed that her beloved became sad. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. "Maybe I can help?" "What can you help?" replied Kevin sadly. "You can't put my mum on her feet. I tried. I took a huge loan. I sent her to Germany for treatment. Mum is much better. Now she can sit up and even stand. But she needs expensive rehab. So I took out a second loan, so I wouldn't lose valuable time, and today I was told that in 2 months I'll be laid off from my job. How am I going to pay off 2 loans at once? And I can't tell my mum the bad news. It will undermine her health." "What's the problem? Come on, I'll pay off your loan. I never had a mum, so at least I'll help yours." "No, I won't let you pay anything for me," Kevin said firmly, "especially since your company is cooperating with this bank. They will say that your boyfriend is an insolvent bum, so no, stay out of it. I'll handle it myself. Let's enjoy the evening." When Faith found herself at home, Kevin's words kept her awake. She couldn't help but want to help him. Kevin was the only person she loved. So the next day, Faith asked her personal assistant to check how much Kevin owed and wipe out the debt with her personal funds. When she received a notification about the withdrawal, she was very surprised at the huge amount Kevin had borrowed. "Can you imagine," she told Sandy, "a bill for a 60,000? Apparently his mum had a very serious illness. I'll have to meet her sometime." "Oh my goodness," said her friend. "Did you pay that much for a stranger? You're out of your mind. You're not even married." "Well, it's an urgent matter. I think he's going to propose soon. It's coming, I can feel it." "Well, I'm happy for you then. Be careful, Faith." When Kevin found out that Faith had paid his debt for him, he became angry, resentful, and stopped answering her calls. Faith didn't even know where he lived to talk to him face to face. But 3 days later, Kevin himself came to her house with flowers. When Faith opened the door, a young man in a beautiful business suit was holding out an engagement ring to her and looking at her as if she were the last woman on earth. "Faith, will you be my wife?" Kevin asked quietly, looking at her hopefully. "Of course!" she exclaimed delightedly. Half an hour later, they were already discussing the details of the upcoming wedding. "It's a pity that my parents won't be able to be happy for us," Faith said sadly. "But we have your mum. By the way, how is she? I'd like to meet her." "Why?" Kevin was surprised. "You'll meet her right away at the wedding. She's still weak from the surgery and physical treatments. Let's reschedule the introductions for later." "Okay," Faith agreed. "But if she's uncomfortable moving around on her own, I can come myself. Why don't we surprise her with some goodies and get to know each other? I also have a present for your mum." "Don't bother," Kevin said after thinking for a while. "We'll come to you, especially since Mum hasn't gone anywhere in years." "Okay, I agree." Faith nodded and smiled. "We'll have to clean up a bit since Thor has his stuff in the corners and fur everywhere. I'll call a cleaning company tomorrow. I don't want to get in trouble in front of my future mother-in-law." All week, Faith tidied up the already perfect house, cleaned the garden with the gardener, and taught Thor commands so that he would not let down the mistress in front of the dear guests. Finally, the day arrived when Kevin and his mother were to drop by. Before their arrival, Faith prepared a sumptuous dinner, bought expensive wine and exotic fruits, all to ensure that Kevin's mother would not feel lacking in anything. Faith even bought a comfortable orthopedic chair for people with mobility difficulties, which could be placed at the table. When the doorbell rang, excited, Faith ran down the stairs to the hallway and opened the front door. Kevin and a pretty woman in her 50s, who looked modestly over her son's shoulder, stood before her. The woman was leaning on a cane, but, to Faith's surprise, Kevin's mother's gait was quite confident, and the girl had the feeling that the cane was an unnecessary object. Also, it seemed to Faith for a moment that she had seen this woman somewhere before, but she couldn't remember where. Waving this thought away, she cordially invited the future kinswoman into the living room. "Hello, I'm overjoyed to see you," she addressed Kevin's mother. "My name is Faith, and I'm Kevin's fiancé. Well, you probably already know that. But what's your name? Kevin didn't tell me." "Hello, my dear Faith," the mother addressed the girl affectionately. "My name is Grace. Yes, my son is secretive, but please don't take offence at him. He's had a hard life, and it's all because of me. As it happens, I had problems with my spine when I was young. Right, son?" Grace looked back at her son, seeking support. "Yes, for as long as I can remember, Mum was always sick," Kevin confirmed. "That's why she couldn't work. We lived on welfare. I was young then, and it's not sweet, you know, when everyone buys everything, and you just look and envy other people's toys." Faith felt uncomfortable that Kevin had to remember the past, which he apparently wanted to forget. Besides, she felt sorry for the sick woman, so Faith decided to invite the guests to the table to treat them to a delicious dinner. Thor was kicked out of the room because he started growling at Kevin again. Grace looked fearfully at the dog, so Faith unceremoniously took the dog by the collar and literally dragged the stubborn Thor out of the living room. "Sit here and think about your behaviour," she scolded him. Thor whimpered and rubbed his muzzle with his paw, which meant that he was apologising and feeling guilty. But the mistress was inexorable. She was afraid that Kevin's mother would be frightened, which might affect her health. When Faith returned to the living room, she found Kevin and his mother sitting at the table and whispering about something. When they saw her, they recoiled from each other and smiled, strained. Faith noticed that Kevin's mum sat in a normal chair, not the specially prepared one with the same mechanism as the chairs at the rehabilitation centre where she was treated. All the clinics in Germany had the same chairs, so this struck Faith as odd. "Grace, it would probably be more comfortable for you to sit here," said Faith, and pointed to the chair. "I specially bought this chair for you, and it has the same mechanism as the chairs at the rehabilitation centre where you were treated." Kevin's mother looked fearfully at her son, carefully got up from the table, and with Kevin's help, sat down in the chair. Faith found it amazing that they could not find the latch that was right under the armrest that allowed the padded footrest to slide out. Faith walked over and helped them get more comfortable. It was obvious that Grace was very nervous. But what was she so worried about? Faith could not understand, and Kevin felt out of place. It was visible to the naked eye. Faith condescendingly wrote off the general nervousness to the first acquaintance. Probably it is the first time Grace has been in such a house and she feels uncomfortable, she thought. The evening went on as usual. They ate, talked about themselves, laughed and drank wine. and Grace drank more wine than all of them. And this peculiarity Faith also wrote off the anxiety of the guest. Once again, when Grace began to tell a new story about Kevin's childhood, Faith noticed how the groom lightly touched his mother's foot with his shoe, so that she apparently did not say too much. She was amused by what she saw. Faith thought that Kevin was afraid that his mother would give away his childhood secret. After dinner, everyone moved smoothly into the hall to the fireplace. Grace decided to stretch her legs, which she did very briskly, to Faith's surprise, and then she decided to examine the pictures standing on the mantel. "How pretty you are here," said Grace good-natured. "How old are you here? 5 or 6 years old?" "Yes," replied Faith. "I am 5.5 here." "And where is your mother? I don't see any pictures of her here. There are only pictures of you, and one picture of an older man. Is that your dad?" "Yes, that's my daddy shortly before he died. Now, I'll show you a picture of him holding me, a newborn, right after I was discharged from the hospital, and my mum died after giving birth." Saying this, Faith pulled out of the dresser an old photo of her father from 25 years ago. When Grace saw the photo of Faith's father in his youth, she suddenly turned pale and grabbed the fireplace stand. It was obvious that she felt ill, and her strength had left her. "What has happened?" Faith became worried. "Are you in pain? Should we call a doctor?" "No," the woman replied weakly. "It's just my blood pressure. It's been a long time since I've been out in public. I'm so weak. Kevin, let's go home. Thank you, darling, for the warm welcome. I really enjoyed it. You're a good girl, and I'm glad Kevin has such a bride. It's a gift from heaven. Thank you for everything, daughter," Grace quietly cried. Now it was Kevin's turn to be surprised. It was evident that he was frightened of his mother. "Sorry, Faith. We'll go. Mum's not feeling well." "I can come with you," Faith offered. "I can stay with her all day tomorrow while you're at work. And then we'll find her a companion. It'll be better." "No," Kevin replied firmly. "You don't need to come with us. It's too late. God forbid anything should happen to you. We'll talk next time. Come on, Mum. It's time for your medication." Faith was upset that the evening had ended so abruptly and badly. She couldn't get the thought of Kevin's mum being swayed by the pictures of her father out of her mind. "Listen," she said to Sandy on the phone. "It was so strange. I showed Kevin's mum the picture of my dad, and her legs gave out. Her blood pressure dropped. I feel like he reminded her of someone, and Kevin seems to know about it." "That's weird," replied Sandy. "You need to figure it out. Otherwise you'll be thinking about it for a long time. I know you. I think you should ask her directly." "But I don't even know where they live," Faith complained. "Kevin is always evasive in his answers. I thought he was shy about their house, comparing it to mine." "It's still strange," parried her friend. "I'm not embarrassed that I have only 1-bedroom apartment in the mortgage bought, which in comparison with your mansion looks like a dog kennel. It's not about that. I can feel it." Faith decided to follow her friend's advice and visit Kevin's mum while he was away. She felt that the woman had acted inhibited in front of her son, afraid to say anything in front of him. Now she knew that firmly, having fully analysed yesterday's meeting. The next day, Faith asked her fiancé to take her to his mother's house, or at least to tell her the address where they lived. But Kevin referred to his busy schedule and avoided answering, not wanting to say where he lived. So, Faith resorted to the help of a private detective agency. Within a couple of days, they provided her with information about where Kevin's mum lived. On the third day, Faith stood on the threshold of the small house of her fiancé, which looked more like a shabby hovel of bums than the dwelling of a successful sales manager. Faith knocked gently and heard shuffling footsteps outside the door. When the door opened, Faith saw Kevin's mother in front of her, but not in the blooming state she had been in the last time, but in a completely opposite way. Her untidy hair and old robe suggested that Grace had recently had a drink. "Hello," the woman said, looking at Faith with cloudy eyes. "Who do you want?" "Don't you remember me?" Faith was shocked. "It's me, Faith, your son's fiancé." Only now the woman realized who was standing in front of her. She was frightened and immediately shrank under Faith's gaze. But still, she invited the girl into the house. After a quick glance around the house, Faith realized that the woman lived all alone and had no problems with her legs. And then Faith suddenly realized she was cruelly deceived. But for what? She noticed that the woman was hiding her eyes shamefully. There is still a conscience in that woman, so not everything is lost for her, thought Faith. "What does this all mean?" she asked Grace. "Are you really Kevin's mother?" The woman seemed to be waiting for these questions. "No, I'm not Kevin's mother. I'm actually a former actress. Kevin hired me to introduce me to you as his mother, and I live here because this is my home. As you can see, I'm strapped for cash. Kevin promised to pay me, but he hasn't given me a dime yet. I think he cheated me, just like he cheated you." "But why?" Faith asked in surprise. "We were going to get married, and anyway, he seemed like such a good and decent person." "He is a nice man, as you say," replied Grace, grinning bitterly, "but he is a real swindler. He told me how he found out that a young and inexperienced rich girl had returned to town to inherit her father's estate. So he caught you in the park while you were walking the dog and masterfully insinuated himself into your confidence. Then he cried that he had a sick mother and had been treating her all his adult life. That's how you got caught, girl. When I saw you and realized what a kind, sympathetic person you are, I was so ashamed that I was involved in this, but I was afraid to confess to you. I thought you'd put me in jail with your connections." "That's why he wouldn't tell me where he lived," Faith gasped. "I trusted him. I paid so much money for your supposed treatment, and all he wanted was my money. And by the way, he hasn't picked up the phone in 2 days." "And he won't," decided Grace. "He cheated you, got the money and probably fled abroad. Please forgive me for helping him. He described you at first as a spoiled bad girl, and I stupidly decided to help him. Of course, the money played a part in it." "I forgive you," said Faith. "I see that you didn't do it out of a good life. And by the way, I promised to help you with housing and a job. Hey, why are you crying?" Grace's lips trembled. Tears flowed in streams. She stretched out her hands to Faith and said something that made the girl's own legs give out. "I'm crying because you are my own daughter. I realized it when I saw the picture of your father as a young man. He was in his 40s when he decided he needed a child to give himself more weight in society. At that time, I was very beautiful and healthy. I played major roles in the theatre. That's where he saw me. Your father offered me to get pregnant with IVF and carry his child. I agreed because I needed money. My husband, whom I love very much, was very sick. So your father gave me a huge deposit on which I was able to cure my sick husband. Although my husband died 5 years ago, he and I had a good life, thanks to your father's help. When you were born, your father took you from my arms without even letting me say goodbye to you. I knew that you weren't my child because the eggs for IVF were not mine, but I had been carrying you for 9 months and I gave birth to you. I loved you as soon as I saw you. You had such tiny hands, big blue eyes, and a cute little heart-shaped face. But your father ordered me and my husband to leave town, and we did, taking the rest of the money. It wasn't until my husband died that I was able to come back here. Then I found out that you were living abroad. People said your father made you do it. I understand why he did it. He didn't want you to know about me and what he did. First, I grieved, then I started drinking. I got kicked out of one job, then another.
And that's how I got to this life. But recently, Kevin came along and offered me a part-time job. He helped me to get my appearance in order, taught me what to say and how to behave. And when I was ready, we came to visit. I didn't know that the rich girl Kevin wanted to cheat would turn out to be my little girl. I don't have any more children except for you. Sometimes I'd walk quietly to your office and watch you get in or out of your car and walk to the door of the firm. I was so happy that you had grown up to be a beautiful, business-like young woman, especially since people in town spoke very well of you, literally praying for you, because your company feeds so many families. I'm sorry, daughter. I'm so glad I could talk to you, frankly. But now, go and live your life, and don't tell anyone that you have such a bad mother. Faith was in deep shock. Her heart was breaking from her mother's words, and tears were pouring from her eyes.
It turned out that all this time, her mother was not dead, but was suffering from remorse and was living impoverished. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not leaving you here alone, Faith answered firmly. You're coming with me to our house, my home, now your home. Mother. When Grace heard these words, she threw herself onto her daughter's neck and wept. With the streams of her tears came out all the pain and guilt that she had accumulated on her soul throughout her life. Faith could not say a word, but instead pressed the skinny woman against herself, stroked her head and kissed her forehead. Mummy, my dear, don't cry, she soothed her mother and herself. From today, everything will change. You won't need anything anymore. I promise you, and I'll say it again. I forgive you. It's not your fault. And the two close people went home. In Faith's huge house, Grace could not find a place for herself. She was worried and kept trying to crawl into a secluded corner, but her daughter wouldn't let her do it. Faith showed that her mother is also the mistress of this house and has the right to live happily ever after. Surprisingly, but Thor liked Grace immediately. Just imagine, Mum, Faith remembered. But Thor disliked Kevin at first sight. He constantly growled at him and tried to kick him out of the house. Pets immediately feel bad people, said the mother, and Thor, well done, did not let my daughter be hurt. Good boy, come here. I'll give you a tasty treat, my good boy. The dog, wagging his tail like a propeller, cheerfully ran up to Faith's mother for a treat. During the couple of weeks, Grace transformed into an attractive and well-groomed woman. Happiness makes people like that. When Sandy learned about Kevin's deception, she advised Faith to go to the police and report him for fraud. So Faith did. The failed fiancé was soon detained because he did not have time to fly abroad and was eventually put in jail. And after another week, Faith realized that she was pregnant and informed her mother. I'm pleased, exclaimed Grace. I'm going to have a grandson or granddaughter. I never even dreamed of such a thing. I'm so happy. Mum, well, I work in a managerial position. How can I be? Said Faith. How am I going to work and look after a baby? We'll manage, daughter, Grace replied affectionately. The future grandmother began preparations for the baby's arrival. She bought the most beautiful things, knitted pinnies and sweaters, and watched the diet and the daily regimen of her daughter, not letting her stress. Pregnancy was hard, with toxemia and edema completely tormenting Faith, but she endured it all stoically for the sake of her baby. Contrary to the advice of doctors, Faith worked until the last moment and did not even think about taking maternity leave. An old friend of her father and a lawyer advised Faith to take a break from work and dedicate her life to preparing for the arrival of her baby. Faith eventually gave in and wrote them a general power of attorney to manage the company. She could trust only these people. One evening when Faith was driving home, she suddenly felt sick. Her head was spinning and her stomach hurt sharply. She pulled over to the side of the road and got out onto the sidewalk. Seeing a bench, Faith sat heavily on it. The pain made her see dark spots and Faith groaned, covering her face with her hands. "Are you okay?" a strange voice asked. Faith felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned and saw a young man. "Don't be afraid, I'm a doctor. I'll call an ambulance right away." "My phone, dead," Faith said through gritted teeth, the pain making it difficult to talk. "And I think I'm having contractions." "I will call the ambulance. Let's go in my van," the man commanded. "I have a good first aid kit and clean water there." The doctor helped Faith to her car and laid her on the spacious back seat. Contractions followed one after another, and soon the street was filled with the cry of a baby girl. The man wrapped her in a clean towel and then his shirt. An ambulance arrived 10 minutes after the birth of the baby. The man escorted Faith to her ward in the hospital and promised to visit. "You're lucky you met Oscar," said one of the nurses. "He used to work here before, but one of his patients died at home from complications, and Oscar couldn't handle such grief and quit. Now he works as a builder, but the skill was helpful. But he's an excellent doctor." Soon Faith's mother arrived out of breath. She was the first to learn that she had a granddaughter. The joy of the new grandmother knew no bounds. When Oscar entered the ward, everyone fell silent, and Faith looked gratefully at him. "If not for you, I don't know what would have happened to us," Faith said quietly. "Thank you for everything." "Any good man would have done the same," the former doctor replied, "so you don't have to thank me." "But there are not many good men now," Faith's mother joined the conversation. "For example, my granddaughter's father doesn't even know he's become a dad because he's a scoundrel. But you're a real hero. I wish I had such a son-in-law," said Grace dreamily. "Why not?" Oscar joked. "I was walking and I saw a lonely girl sitting on a bench. I thought maybe I should marry her. Why should a good woman be lost alone?" Everyone laughed. The room was filled with happiness. Faith's heart skipped a beat. She realized that before her was not only a real man, but also her soulmate. And so it happened that fate's magic became true with her mother's joke. On the day of discharge, Oscar met Faith with flowers and took her baby girl in his arms.